Welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be concluding our series that looks into the basic nature of conservatism. We'll be discussing Frank S. Meyer's 1965 essay, The Recrudescent American Conservatism. I have a little disclaimer for you guys today. This video is pretty intricate, and if you have not watched the previous two videos about Russell Kirk and William F. Buckley, I would recommend that you consider doing so and coming back. And make sure to subscribe while you're at it so you can be in the loop whenever I upload a video. But enough with that. Now, before we jump into the essay, let us do a little background information first. I mean, who even is Frank S. Meyer anyway? Well, Meyer was a political philosopher who worked for National Review magazine, where he became known as the architect of the theory of fusionism. Fusionism, of course, being the combination, or coalition if you prefer, of traditionalists, libertarians, and anti-communists into an infinitely more united movement than was previously the case. Meyer had a particularly interesting intellectual background that perhaps made him best suited for his agenda. Despite being born an American, for much of his life, Meyer was a dedicated communist. It was not until he read the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek during World War II that he began to transition towards studying the free market and the roots of American conservatism. And so the game pieces were all set up for play. We have here Meyer, the ex-communist and hardline libertarian, who would mellow out and collaborate in the great modern conservative intellectual renaissance. That is our context, and now let us begin. Frank Meyer begins his essay with a general overview of conservatism as an intellectual movement as well as its origins. In his words, such a movement arises historically when the unity and balance of civilization are riven by revolutionary transformations of previously accepted norms of polity, society, and thought. That is to say that conservatism is inherently counter-revolutionary. It is concerned with a revival of a tradition that was lost amid a radical shift in the political, moral, or intellectual order. And herein prompts the fundamental question of conservatism. How do you actually restore the lost traditions? Well, Meyer says that conservatism is compelled to be both reactionary and presentist. Let's break down what he means by this. Alright, bear with me here for a second. Let's consider for a moment the nature of revolutions. I mean, what are they? What do they signify? In Meyer's conception, revolutions mark a clear break from the continuity and former consensus ideas that underlie a society. In that, a revolution explicitly creates the past from which it departed, pre-revolution and post-revolution. Now, because conservatism is both counter-revolutionary and focused on recovering the gems of a past that a revolution manufactured, conservatism is in part reactionary. But it would be a mistake to assume that this is all it is. Meyer argues that you can never perfectly go back to the way things were, so conservatism is also about using the past to address the present and fight against the feigned legitimacy of the post-revolutionary status quo. Conservatism is a vindication and renewal of the civilizational tradition as the fundament upon which reason must build to solve the problems of the present. It demands only that reason operate upon the foundation of the tradition of civilization, that is, upon the basis of the accumulated reason, experience, and wisdom of past generations. Reason is integral to the conservative, and that reason is grounded upon and guided by the proven wisdoms of civilizational tradition. So, having briefly expounded upon conservatism, broadly speaking, Meyer next focuses on the American conservative movement, which he thinks was born out of reaction to revolution manifest in the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932. This revolution in America ushered in the age of liberalism, not to be confused with classical liberalism, of course, and was part of a global revolutionary movement. Meyer sees liberalism, socialism, communism, and Nazism as all resultant of the ascendancy and deification of the state over the individual. In any case, conservatism in America emerged to challenge the assumptions and dominance of liberalism. Now, there are two main factions of American conservatism. There are those who emphasize tradition and virtue, known as traditionalists, and those who emphasize reason and freedom, known as libertarians. These two groups persist to this day, and while they may disagree with one another, which they most definitely do, and we will talk about it later, they nevertheless are in consensus about certain fundamental points, which Meyer spent some time contrasting against the liberal worldview. Specifically, Meyer delineates between conservatives and liberals with the following subjects. Number 1, objectivity. Number 2, individuality. Number 3, utopia. Number 4, state power. Number 5, free enterprise. Number 6, the Constitution. And number 7, foreign policy. Let's quickly run down this list so as to be more thorough. Alright, so as to point 1 about objectivity, conservatives accept reality as having an ordered nature to it. I will now relay to you a few excerpts from Meyer's essay that clearly develop the point further. The conservative looks at political and social questions with the assumption that there are objective standards for human conduct and criteria for the judgment of theories and institutions. As the conservative's worldview is, in Richard Weaver's phrase, a world of essence is to be approximated, the liberals' world is a world of problems to be solved. Hence the liberals' concern with modes and operations, such as democracy, a mode or means of government which implies that what is morally right is what 50% plus one think is right, or progress, a concept that derives norms from the operation of historical events, establishing as the good the direction in which events have been moving and seem presently to be moving. Roughly speaking, a Plato, Aquinas, or Kant type versus a Mill, Dewey, or Foucault type. But this deep distinction in objectivity about standards and interpretations is effervescent not only in political philosophy, it divides the arts and sciences as well. There's a lot more I want to say about all this, but I'm trying really hard not to get sidetracked, so let's move on. The next item on our list is individuality. Conservatives strongly believe in the primacy of the individual, rejecting the liberal prism of collectivist politics, which Meyer identifies as the bedrock of their theories and policies. Conservatives respect individuals and recognize their sovereign autonomy. They disavow the abstracting away of the individual into amorphous collective entities based around categories and identities like class and race. The third difference between conservatives and liberals is quite simple. Conservatives are unequivocally anti-utopian. I've talked about this point in previous episodes, but it is well worth reiterating. Conservatives do not believe in the perfectibility of man or society. For that reason, no matter how pure the professed motives are, they will always be naturally averse towards schemes of designing or planning society. As to the fourth point about state power, I will let Meyer say it in his own way. Conservatives may vary on the degree to which the power of the state should be limited, but they are agreed upon the principle of limitation and upon the firmest opposition to the liberal concept of the state as the engine for the fixing of ideological blueprints upon the citizenry. Naturally, this leads well into the idea of free enterprise. Obviously, conservatives tend to recoil from state control of the economy, a thing liberals are more sanguine about. True enough that the conservatives' conviction in this matter is a logical extension of their principle of limitation. But not just that. They also reject engorging the state with utter economic power because they prefer the existence of counterbalancing forces and institutions against the public sphere. And, further, because they believe the free market more readily responds to individual demand and is infinitely superior to the government at producing wealth, innovation, and resources. Item 6 on our list was about the Constitution. Conservatives believe in the original conceit of the Constitution, the protection of individual liberty through limitations on the power of the government. Paramount to this goal is the separation of powers, i.e., checks and balances in federalism. In that sense, as Meyer says, ultimate sovereignty lies in no single body, but rather exists in the tension among powers. Conversely, liberals ostensibly wrest sovereignty in democratic majorities, which the essay argues inexorably trends toward the executive branch of the national government. And finally, we are left with differences in foreign policy. At first glance, this would seem to be the least relevant of points from the essay, as it talks about the conservative versus liberal position on communism. Remember, this essay was from the 60s. However, there are some underlying truths yet present. For instance, conservatives, as opposed to liberals, are derisive toward vague internationalism, as Meyer terms it. And they remain extremely skeptical of the notion that if we placate our enemies with appeasements and concessions, that they will suddenly turn around and become our friends. Nay, there will ever be intractable barriers wrought from variabilities and incongruities among cultures, values, and national interests. So it is with liberals versus conservatives. Now we are ready to move on to the next portion of the essay, investigating the traditionalist-libertarian divide. So where do the conservative strains even come from exactly? Well, says Meyer, they actually both originate from the same tradition. They just more so stress different aspects of it. And that tradition is the founding consensus evinced by the constitutional settlement of 1789. The Constitution, Meyer argues, is the covenant of the American age. It was the ultimate synthesis, a respect for the tradition together with a respect for reason, the acceptance of the authority of an organic moral order together with a fierce concern for the freedom of the individual person. To that end, the tension between traditionalists and libertarians reflect a tension inherent to the American tradition. However, the bitterness through which the two halves of conservatism bicker with one another, especially today, is something else entirely, and has a different origin. In Meyer's conception, the traditionalist-libertarian conflict has been exacerbated from a healthy variance into a struggle of epic misunderstandings through the forced imposition of the European political dimensions into the American context. A brief word before I let Meyer speak his piece. From what I gather, his postulations have become contentious among pretty much all sides who perceive in them missteps and causes for offense. In any case, Meyer writes about how the presupposition that American politics can or should be reduced into the European liberal conservative model has produced immense confusion and misunderstandings. Chief among them is that, although the classical liberal forgot, and the contemporary libertarian conservative sometimes tends to forget, that in the moral realm, freedom is only a means whereby men can pursue their proper end, which is virtue, he did understand that in the political realm, freedom is the primary end. That is to say, that the final goal or purpose of political freedom is to engender the condition wherein man may voluntarily embrace the harmony of the good. For such universal morality remains the only solid foundation upon which a civilization may genuinely assert and justify the value of the individual and their freedom. Alright, having said that, I feel compelled to reiterate once again that traditionalists and libertarians are elements of the same tradition, of which they should be grounding their reason out of. Okay, now we may proceed to the final section of the essay, which speaks of the problems of the conservative movement and their remedy. Meyer ends his essay by discussing two serious issues American conservatives face. The first problem is really a loss of focus. Meyer says that the conservative movement exists for the transformation of the consciousness of an age. The great danger here is conservatives becoming almost complacent within the liberal paradigm, playing along in their game and failing to decry its supposed legitimacy. Concentration on method without greater emphasis on transforming consciousness could lead only to practical political rivalry with liberalism on its own grounds. Such a development of conservatism would end by making it a right wing of the liberal consensus, not a challenge to its essence. As has been said, conservatives must reawaken the dormant spirit of the American tradition and make it answer to the demands of the modern age. Related to that is conservatism's second problem, namely, that the conservative answer to a lot of social and political problems is negative. You see, in the contemporary United States, the liberal framework has prevailed, and its worldview has infected the consciousness of the citizens. Whenever there may be a problem, there is an expectation of positive action, aka the use of government power to solve issues. However, the conservative reply is that sometimes the supposed social and political problem are superficial, and sometimes they're likely natural or inevitable. Often the conservative looks at societal problems and reasons that governmental planning to address it would simply make it worse or introduce further evils. They believe that the government should be limited so that the people themselves may more freely explore and devise novel solutions. The problem, then, is that conservative solutions are inherently unsatisfying to the mind raised by liberalism. Liberals go about promising all sorts of wonderful things. They have all their romantic visions on which they attempt to engineer society. Conservatives do not. They are easily portrayed as cold and small-minded. The truth is that they believe in the people, in their industry, and in their ingenuity. They believe in voluntary association, and that the sword of the state cannot and should not be unsheathed every time there is a modicum of unhappiness. For Meyer's part, he says that the American conservative movement must be further developed. Its adherents must understand its principles and understand themselves. Conservatives must confront liberalism on every point and on every plan, and definitively prove their folly, be it philosophically, economically, or pragmatically. And with that, we have concluded the essay. What did you think about all of that? I know it was kind of a lot, but major props to you for sticking through to the end. Do you lean toward traditionalism or libertarianism? Do you think there are any more noteworthy divides among conservatives and liberals now 60 years after the essay was published? How have these movements developed since things like the conclusion of the Cold War or the more populist moment of the last decade? I'll let you contemplate on it. In any event, I think I may do a companion video to this one about the various responses and critiques about Frank S. Meyer and his ideas, spanning from the libertarian to the leftist. I'm unsure when it would come out, but I'll keep you posted. If you like this video, you can show your support by hitting the subscribe button and leaving a comment. Alright, thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.